5 key questions left after the Jim Ratcliffe and Ben Ainslie divorce. Has Ben Ainslie been fired? How does it affect them as challenger of record? What are the two entities left with after the split? Why did they fall out? And what's next for INEOS Britannia and Athena Pathway? So has Ben Ainslie been fired? Well, no, because the team that Ben Ainslie belongs to is his team, Athena Racing, previously Ben Ainslie Racing. It was created, I think, back as far as when Ben was racing with Oracle in the 2013 America's Cup, and he competed in the World Series with his Ben Ainslie Racing. Since then, Land Rover has been a title sponsor, and then INEOS with INEOS Team UK, and then for the last cup with INEOS Britannia. So that INEOS name is just a sponsorship arrangement. So effectively, Jim can't fire Ben from his own team. What's happened here is Jim Ratcliffe, INEOS Group, has withdrawn their funding for Ben Ainslie's Athena team. So how does this affect INEOS Britannia or Athena Racing, or actually Royal Yacht Squadron as the challenger of record? Well, one of the things that have made the America Cup so enduring is the fact that it's based on sailing clubs, member sailing clubs, challenging one another. So the competition is actually between the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron and, as challenger of record, the Royal Yacht Squadron in Cowes. The teams that represent these sailing clubs are kind of contracted in by the sailing clubs. Now, all the indications so far from the Royal Yacht Squadron is they will stick with Athena, who were the contracted team, albeit with INEOS naming sponsorship in the last cup. They'll stick with them as their syndicate. And given the relationship of Ben with the Royal Yacht Squadron, I think they'll give him every opportunity to find the funding needed to continue that relationship. Now, that's not discounting the fact that if Ben struggles to find the funds and Athena Pathway folds as a challenging team or syndicate, that the Royal Yacht Squadron couldn't then look back towards INEOS, or INEOS sets up a new team and gives the Royal Yacht Squadron a offer they can't refuse, so that they drop Athena and go with INEOS. That is a possibility as well, but I think in the first instance we're likely to see Athena continue in the role as the team representing the Royal Yacht Squadron. So the big question is, what are the two entities now left with after this split? You've got Ben Ainslie Racing, or Athena Pathway, Athena as it's called, and then you've got the INEOS Group with INEOS Britannia, a new challenging team. What are they left with? Well, the last cup, everything was done under Athena Racing, so all the work that was done, you'd expect the intellectual property to be retained by Athena Racing. There's also the contracts with the sailors and crew, who again you'd expect to be with Athena Racing, and any contracts which ran past the end of last cup, you'd expect those to be retained by Athena Racing. And then lastly is the physical property, so the actual race boat, chase ribs, all that kind of stuff. Anything that is owned, you'd expect it to be owned by Athena Racing. Now, that's all pretty positive, but a lot of that stuff doesn't have a huge amount of value, and this is one of the struggles of commercialising America's Cup racing, is the teams themselves don't have a lot of value beyond the end of the Cup, because there's not a lot of retained stuff, and a lot of the assets they do own depreciate really quickly and are quite big liabilities. INEOS Britannia, on the other hand, what do they come away with? Well, they've still got Jim Ratcliffe's billions of pounds. But because the relationship extended beyond just a pure sponsorship, INEOS, remember, also provided the expertise from Brackley, the actual physical offices where the team worked, where a lot of their parts were manufactured, where a lot of the computing power were, and where a lot of the personnel who on the design team were contracted from, either on a kind of secondment or a rates basis. Then Mercedes take that all with them. Now, additionally, while Athena traditionally under most contract types would own the intellectual property produced out of the work done by Mercedes for them, Mercedes will be presumably holding a lot of that information, a lot of that modelling on their computers, and obviously retain all the kind of infrastructure to build a lot of those parts. So, that's going to be an interesting legal point of how that property is then disseminated between the teams. I think what's clear, though, is that both of these entities are now weaker than they were before, and both of them have bits missing from their makeup. INEOS is missing a yacht club. Athena is missing a sponsor. INEOS is missing, its headline sailor. Athena is missing its kind of F1 backing that it had and made so much of in the last Cup. Why have Jim and Ben fallen out? This is a curious question. I mean, of all Jim's sporting athletes, INEOS Britannia were the only one on the up, improving from Auckland to Barcelona. Well, I think there was a few indications that all wasn't quite well. First of all, INEOS sponsorship didn't extend to the women's and youth. Now, that was sponsored in part by Cobham Ultra, who are a subsidiary owned by Jim Radcliffe for defence stuff. So there was a relationship there, but it wasn't particularly strong. So there was an inkling that INEOS maybe weren't kind of fully committed to the whole Athena package. Then secondly, after the last day of racing, Ben Ainslie came ashore and instantly got out the INEOS branded clothes and put on his own clothes, which again hinted that maybe INEOS, although they were in it for next Cup and were making the right noises, that there was something else a little bit amiss. Now, a lot of people have speculated, and kind of you could see why, about potentially Ben not wanting to get off the boat and there being a disagreement about who helmed. And I can see why, because Ben is getting older. I thought Ben's performance in the Cup was actually pretty good from a sailing perspective. I think he actually, this sounds a bit condescending, but I think he actually matured in relationship with the other sailors on the boat. He brought a lot of the team racing know-how to that partnership with Dylan on the water. Ultimately, the way they sailed the boat was nowhere near as good as what Emirates Team New Zealand were doing, but, there's a whole other video on why that was. So I wouldn't necessarily want to be dropping Ben, but in his recent podcast, he did say that, in future they would look at it as a team and do what was right for the team in terms of helming the boat, suggesting, he would step back. And in other elements of the sport, so Sail GP, where he's a team owner, he has stepped back from sailing there as well. So I don't think it was who was helming which would be the major sticking point between these two parties. The second thing was, I guess, after Ben isn't sailing on the boat, you've got to ask what his value to the team is. I think this is more likely to be the sticking point. Ben would require quite a large salary, hugely famous sailor, but is he worth that once he's off the boat as a team CEO? And I guess that's what Jim would have been asking himself. And we know one member of the new INEOS Britannia team is Dave Endine, who was the COO, operations officer from the previous Cup, and he's effectively got promoted into that top role by Jim. Why would you pay an inflated sailor salary for a CEO role, which doesn't necessarily mean a lot of sailor experience, is a question. Now, even this alone, I don't think would have been a reason for a complete fallout because, well, surely you could find a role for Ben in that team, even if he's not on the boat, and he is a great figurehead for the sport. I think more likely the sticking point was what is Jim Ratcliffe at INEOS Britannia getting back for this sponsorship? I've already said how the team was structured, that this was a backing of the team, a sponsorship. They didn't own anything. It wasn't Jim's team, it was Ben's team, Athena Racing, backed by INEOS. If you look at the other billionaires who are involved, whether that is with Prada or with Alinghi, they own the teams, and I think that changes the perspective on it. Jim might have been looking at those other teams and said, actually, they're putting millions in, hundreds of millions in, but they're getting ownership of the team. It is their team. This isn't my team. And potentially, I think the most likely reason for a sticking point was INEOS wanting equity in Athena and a stake in that team or just to be the team owners outright for their money, which, you know, if you're spending hundreds of millions on something, you want that. Obviously, that's just complete speculation. So what is next for these teams now? Well, Athena Pathway do have probably a lot of the actual physical assets, property. They have a core team. They seem to have some of the social media accounts, and the sailors are either in contract, or if they're not in contract, then some of them may be kind of tangentially linked through contracts with SailGP. I imagine SailGP, the sailors are contracted to a central contract and then kind of paid out to the teams as part of their franchise. So they might not be directly related to Athena, I'm not sure. But there is that kind of relationship that Ben has with the sailors through these other teams. And, you know, a lot of these sailors he gave their first breaks to. But the big thing missing, or there's two big things missing now for Athena. One is a whole heap of cash to fund their next campaign. And the second thing is a design house. Like, a lot was made of the F1 partnerships and how integrated they really were. And for a long time, some of these F1 partnerships have been a bit on the surface. This was the first partnership between INEOS, Britannia and Athena where it was true. They were actually working out of Brackley and a lot of the design came from there. But this has effectively really weakened Ben's team in that when the sponsor pulls out with that whole design team, you're left with so much less as a going entity, as a going concern, Athena Racing. And that is a lot of the value of these America's Cup team, is that retained knowledge in the design. But if Ben can find designers and money, or money and then designers more likely, he's still got the in with the Royal Yacht Squadron and has strong relationships throughout the sailing community. INEOS Britannia, on the other hand, have the design capabilities of Mercedes. They probably have the contracts with a lot of those staff and auxiliary staff from the design side. And they've got the billions of money buying power from INEOS and Jim Radcliffe. I think, obviously, what they're missing is sailors and potentially a yacht club to challenge through. I don't think either of those are major hurdles, but it could be interesting to see whose allegiances lie with Ben Ainslie and Athena Racing, and who would be tempted over by the security of a paycheck with INEOS Britannia. In terms of the most likely outcome, honestly, I think one of these teams is going to fall away. INEOS have also announced a spending review of all their sporting assets, and maybe there could be a coming step down even from their newly announced INEOS Britannia challenge without a yacht club. That would be very easy to wind up if they wanted to save a few $100 million. Athena, on the other hand, are looking shaky from a funding perspective, so it's not looking great for both. And that will concern the other kind of stakeholder in this, and that's the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron and Emirates Team New Zealand, who have seen their challenge of a record weaken substantially. Now, they'll be hoping that Athena and the Royal Yacht Squadron can fulfill their obligations as challenger of record sufficiently far that they can set up the running of the next America's Cup. And if they fall away at a later point, like Hamilton Island did, then another team can step in. But if that collapses completely really quickly, it could leave the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron and Emirates Team New Zealand in a bit of a sticky position of who the next challenger will be if they have to substantially negotiate terms with that challenger. Interesting times, certainly. I'll be keeping a track on it, and I'll keep you updated if I have anything super interesting to say. But that is my first thoughts on the situation.